Good afternoon and welcome to Georgia DNR's Lunch and Learn webinar. I'm Emily Wingo of the Georgia DNR Floodplain Unit. First, a little housekeeping. We are in listen-only mode, so make sure your mic is muted. If you're having any Wi-Fi issues, you may want to turn off your camera and any other programs you may have running. Please make note of the chat feature on your screen. Please use the chat for communication as we will not be taking questions by audio. Isabel Rogers of Dewberry is monitoring the chat and will try to help you with any technical matters. We are offering 1 hour of continuing education credits for CFMs. To receive the credit, you must be logged in separately, answer all poll questions during the session, and provide your name and email at the end of the presentation. Please use the radio buttons to respond to the poll questions either in the pop-up window or the chat box. A copy of the presentation will be emailed to all attendees. Also, a survey link will be provided at the end of the presentation. We appreciate you completing this survey so we can improve these webinars in the future. We are recording today's webinar and plan to post the video on georgiadfirm.com. With that, let's get started. Today's presentation is how 2024 Debby is helping Chatham County prepare for the 2025 hurricane season. Our presenter is Dr. Angela Bliss with Chatham County. Dr. Angela Bliss, CFM, is the Chatham County Floodplain Administrator and CSR Program Manager. She earned her BS and MS in Environmental Engineering from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. In 2018, she earned her PhD from the University of Georgia in Adult Education, along with a Qualitative Research Certificate. She has worked for over 20 years along the coast of Georgia with educators and scientists through the employment with the UGA Marine Extension Service and 4-H Cooperative Extension Service. She began coordinating stormwater programs at the Savannah-Chatham County Metropolitan Planning Commission, and then after earning her CFM in 2023, she moved to her current role just in time for the named storms to impact her in 2025. In her free time, she fosters Renegade Paws Rescue, volunteers at Tybee Island Maritime Academy, and serves as a den leader with Savannah's Pac 7. And with that, I'll now turn it over to Angela.
Hey, Emily, thank you. And thank you all for being able to join us today for Lunch and Learn. Like Emily said, last year was an eventful year in many capacities. What I wanted to focus on today was being new in the CFM realm and also new as a floodplain manager. It was a fun year, but how is that helping to prep us as we're approaching our 2025 season? So appropriate title for Georgia. So we'll get started. Let's see. Hold on a minute. I'm going to go that way. Uh-oh, it's not. Oh, there we go. All right, so while we're together, our goals for this time, recapping the 2024 hurricane season and discussing it as far as how it impacted unincorporated Chatham County. So if you think of the larger piece of the puzzle, my small piece of the puzzle is the unincorporated Chatham County municipality, and then just regulating that special flood hazard area of that county, of that municipality. So then identifying how we pulled our CRS data from the Emergency Operations Center data. And so, and again, some of these might be what you will go through or how your services and agencies are divided up. And it might also, be different. So, and then I want to present to you what we're trying to do to make 2025 a little bit easier, not so stressful. All right. So 2024 hurricane season recap. If some of you were able to go to the hurricane conference last week in Savannah, you might have gotten to listen to Mr. Morales present some information. But of the hurricane season recap, there were 18 named storms, 14 is average. There were 11 hurricanes in last season, 7 is the average number. There were 5 major hurricanes, which is a Cat 3 to 5. And 3 is normal. So just by the data, we had a more active season than historical or what we would call normal. 3 of those storms directly impacted Chatham County. It was Debby, Helene, and Milton. With the we'll focus most directly or most specifically on Debby. Just as you'll see, Helene and Milton, their impacts weren't that great for our part of the puzzle. So with the five storms that did hit, and one 5 storms that hit the U.S., 1 to 2 were considered normal, like you usually at 1 to 2. And then we had 2 major. So Helene and Milton were major hurricanes, and typically you get 1 every 2 years. So with Debby, it did impact as a hurricane, but it had downgraded to tropical storm by the time it got to our time. Now, one thing I can't stress enough is some of you may be way more experienced in floodplain and CRS and CFM than I am. Last year, I started as Chatham County's floodplain administrator in January. We had some staff change. We had some pluses and minuses. And so we had a new inspector come on board in April. We got our floodplain system. She retired in the fall. And then we had a GIS floodplain partner come on board. So we had one of our GIS staff members who I was able to pull and help have him focus totally on our floodplain and our CRS components. So all of that to say, we had a pretty new team and we had a lot of activity. So we walked around like this poor cat most of the time. It was a lot to take in. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, I feel you. I felt that way. Praying not to feel that way this coming year in 25. But let's look specifically at the storms. So you can see the track in the back, and then that was an aerial for Debby. And like I said, it hit Florida's coast as a Hurricane 1 on August 5th. So my birthday's the 6th. I was expecting to take it off and sit out on Tybee, and that was not the case. But I sat in my living room watching the weather. And so it was a pretty wet storm. So we had a lot of rain, 15 to 20 inches of rain. And that's where it's kind of becoming evident maybe why we, with the path it was given and the amount of rain, why this might have been the one we received the most impact from in our area. As far as summary of Helene, it was a major hurricane. It hit as a Category 4 on September 26th, and it had some stigmas as far as the strongest hurricane on record in the Florida Big Bend region, one of the deadliest hurricanes since Katrina, and it devastated communities from the sea up through the Appalachian Mountains. And so fatalities ranged directly from the storm from about 150 to 250. So it had a lot of freshwater flooding deaths and wind deaths and a lot of tornadoes that spawned. So just kind of with all of that, those pieces and components to take into account when you're trying to help your community stay safe from these storms. And the last one was Milton, and it was a major hurricane as well. It hit as a Cat 3. It actually had gotten up to a Category 5, but luckily had downgraded due to like some eyewall conversions before it hit Florida's coast in October. So this one is documented as having about 15 deaths, and if you look in the tropical cyclone report, and then 27 indirect deaths. So but $34 billion in damages, mostly in that state of Florida. So a lot of money, a lot of activity last year in our FEMA region. And so, yeah, so again, if you felt overwhelmed, this is why. So with the focus, for all of you guys that may not be familiar with Chatham County, the map on the left indicates where we're located. So we're the northernmost coastal county in Georgia. And then on the right, you have the different municipalities that are within our area. And so if we talk about, we have Bloomingdale, Vernonburg, Tybee Island, Garden City, Pooler, Port Wentworth. And then if you look at all the orange space, that's the city of Savannah. So you can see how it's kind of spread throughout the county. And then all of the green, that light green, that's what I call my area. That's the area where we focus on with our CRS efforts in this special flood hazard area in the green. So to give you an idea of how it's broken out. So when the storms were hitting, you activate your EOC, your Emergency Operations Center, and they have so much going on in the moment of during the event. So you can imagine all the structural and all the personal call, the emergency calls and whatnot that are coming in. And during this time, they have crews going out and they're getting those active during event photographs. So this image shows 3 of the areas that came to be a CRS focus later. But just to give you an idea of how much rain event we received, um, flooding from the Ogeechee area that we did receive in our community. And so we had a lot of roads were waterways where the boats had to get to them. A lot of the cars were inundated during this event. So there's such a larger view than what CRS is as far as the homes. But they had many staff members from the county offices that were helping make these assessments. And it's the IADA, the Individual Assistance Damage Assessment. And that IADA list is what I'll talk about in a moment that led into our CRS list. And you guys might be acronymed out because it does get quite a lot. But when we talk about our CRS and our substantial damage inspections, this IADA list we received from these active during event crews is what I'll be talking about. So these pages might look familiar. Sorry for the fact they're blurry. But it talks when you're going out, when the IADA and the CRS teams were going out doing their classifications, it was important to be consistent. And so IADA had used these evaluation tools to classify the impacts to these structures. And so we pulled those into our toolbox as we went out to our structures. And when we were going out for our CRS evaluations, the thing we were looking for is whether or not that structure was substantially damaged. So when you think of how the IADA assessments were being done, that's a quick boat by, drive by, head by assessment, a real quick photo of what they saw when they were out during those flood moments, during that storm. Now, depending on when they came, depended on had the Ogeechee crested, was there more damage coming, or were they hitting it post crest, or were they hitting it as it had, as it was coming in? So we have the date and all the images from the IADA, but you can see how when you're looking just at that structure and the living space impact to make our substantial damage, you can see where those two lists, the IADA list and our CRS substantial damage list, they're going to be a little bit different. So in accordance with the National Flood Insurance Program, we define substantial damage as damage of any origin that was sustained to a structure where the cost of restoring that structure to that pre-damaged condition is equal or exceeding that 50% of the market value of just that structure. And so when we're looking at that and making those judgment calls, you really had to focus on where did the water get? Did it get into the living space? Did it get to the skirt? Did it get to the just the crawl space area? So very important. All right, so as far as the flood zone, so remember I'm unincorporated Chatham County, and in our flood damage prevention ordinance, we regulate the SFHA. So anything in the X shaded are not regulated currently under our ordinance. And so this gives you an indication of kind of the sparseness and the spread out ability or the spread outness, the range of that extent of the community. So you can see we're poised for tidal in this riverine. One thing I thought was fascinating in Debby is a lot of our communities in the coastal part of our jurisdiction indicated how they were impressed the county did not receive any impacts from Debby. Well, that's not the case. We did receive impacts from Debby, but they were more along the riverine side. And so it seems as you move forward and you're working with your community, sometimes there's a complacency that only storm flooding happens on your tidally influenced areas. And so working with your riverine communities is incredibly important so that they understand it's a double, it could be a double whammy, or you could, hit one way or the other. So CRS for the unincorporated is just that SFHA, which is kind of the periwinkle and pink zones, with the AE and the VE zones. All right, so when the IADA list came in, we were able to take, so by this time in the timeline, the EOC had shut down or become very skeletal based, right? The event had moved on and there were some other assessments going on, but for the most part, the event had passed. So we were able to get that IADA list and pull that focused into the SFHA areas to give us the impact or the hot spots of where we needed to do our CRS inspections and do those substantial damage inspections. So we received a list of about 52 structures, excuse me, and then that put us in roughly 6 different areas in the county. So great. So we waited. And if you've had a class with Ron Shaun, you know there's a 3 to 5 day get out there after the water recedes. So waiting was really challenging because you didn't want someone to do something and mess up with pulling things out of their house they might needed a photographed, or doing something without a permit that they needed to get a permit for. So with that, we still had some impacted areas. There were so many structures when we're looking at our IADA list and converted it over to our SFHA. There were so many roads we couldn't get down. And here the storm came in August 6th, and we couldn't get to most of our impacted areas. And so then we waited. And then now it's August 11th. We're still waiting. And so this riverine water wasn't leaving. It had come into a flat space, so we had no topography to drain it out. It was that mugginess, that summer, coastal summer where things just don't evaporate. Your towels stay wet forever, as do your wet boots. So we waited, and that's a really tricky space when you feel like you need to be out there helping your community, but then you're having to wait because you don't have access. We did try to access areas as soon as we could get a report back. So the last space that we could access was at August the 22nd. And I was incredibly nervous for this area because of the amount of water that they presumably sustained during this event. But then when we got to that road and noticed that almost every one of the structures were elevated in some capacity, this one was elevated quite a lot. But when you see that most of them are elevated and that the watermarks are not in the living space, it was a relief. So 16 days after the event, we could get out and to all of our areas that had been impacted, and we got all of our inspections done by that time. Again, so once as your CRS training and you're getting out there for your substantial damage, you do a lot as far as getting those post-storm surveys done 3 to 5 days after that water recedes. You want to try and beat the community out. They want to get back into their home. They want to do what they can do, and there's that urgency. They want their life to get back to normal, whatever that new normal might look like. So but you're hitting some areas that, again, still had standing water to some part in their backyard. And like I said earlier, we didn't wait until all the waters receded. We actually, I was granted access and had 2 teams, 2 to 3 folks, depending on what day. And we were able to go out and get those inspections done for substantial damage as soon as we could make it to the communities areas. So snapshot of how our teams were. So with our CRS teams that we had, we worked to identify that substantially damaged home. Was it substantially damaged? It wasn't a classification we took lightly. There were many pieces and parts that were to be looked at to determine if you could call it a substantial damage structure, because it changes the game for many of these community or these structures on if it's labeled substantial damage. Obviously, in our ordinance, if it's substantially damaged, they have to come into compliance with their with the current flood damage prevention ordinance. And we regulate areas seaward of the Limwa. We regulate that area as our coastal A zone. So that would require some to go from slab up 10 feet. So we understand why and the importance of doing that, but at the same time, making that determination is a large burden, and you want to make it correctly. So with our team members, like I said, there were 2 to 3 members, and at least one of us was a CFM on each of the teams. And we took tons of photos of the structures from every side. Sometimes if there was fencing up, we couldn't get back there, but there was a lot of standing water. One area we were at still had water with fish in the driveways as we're trying to do our substantial damage. It had receded from the homes, but a lot of the areas along the ditches along the road and then in their driveways were still fish just swimming around. And then as far as our team, as we're going out, a lot of things changed. We were able to see what data had been collected by the IADA inspections. We were able to see that some of the structures had not gotten any water into their living space. Even though they might have been declared destroyed by the IADA, they were not labeled as that in our CRS evaluation. But then there were some homes that had been impacted that were missed on the IADA. So we worked as a good team to get that data collected. It also was a great time to be out there and to work with your community. One of the spaces we went to, we had our county badges and our safety vests on, so we were in county vehicles, and so folks would come out to us and were identifying some needs they still had. So it was a good time just as a community service of being out there. The folks, their cars had been flooded, so they could have transportation while the roads were flooded because they had kayaks and boats. Once the water receded, they didn't because their car was damaged. So it was really it was eye-opening, and it was I don't want to say a wonderful time, but it was good to be out there to see how the community needed assistance, and not just for floodplain, but for basic community needs. And then the other thing, I guess personally, I wasn't quite prepared for the numbers that we dealt with that did not have insurance, flood insurance or homeowners insurance, and so being prepared on what other assistance those folks might have, and even up in the communication efforts for those communities on the importance of insurance is definitely being folded into our 2025 approach, but I'll get to that. So as far as things we work to share when we were out in the community, so before they do the work, do you need a permit for that work? Here's where you need to go for that permit. Here's a phone number. It's no good giving them a web page when they don't have their computers or they don't have the internet access. So making sure that the information you're providing is information that they can actually utilize in their current situation. And then identifying the ones that do and do not need a permit, and then providing your contact information. If you don't have a way to assist them currently, then we provided our phone numbers, and then that way they could phone us back when they were out of space to have conversation and ask them questions when, as they moved along the timeline of recovery. As far as substantial damage and substantial improvement basics, the whole part of don't hesitate, estimate and get it done. And you can use the SDE, the substantial damage estimator. We actually used Survey 123 we could download that one of our interns had made for us in the GIS department, and having her out, we could modify that inspection survey that we would complete for each structure. And so, but there's so many different tools that are out and available for you if you're not comfortable using the SDE or if you haven't had time to prepare. But looking at that tool, looking through that handbook or guidebook that they give is valuable so that you'll know how in-depth of that inspection needs to be when you go out for your SD assessments after a storm. So getting familiar with that now is very helpful for survival. When you do costs, and then not for your substantial damage, as they're preparing things, the costs have to include a wider range than just materials. And so the labor, site prep, demo, and different pieces and parts. So if and then with the 50% of the home's value, not the land, not the combined value just of the home. So making sure you're familiar with what costs need to be included when you determine the substantial damage estimate is important. With levels of documentation, there were a lot of questions of what's the benefit. As a community, there's many benefits of of sticking strong to your substantial damage determinations. It provides that break in a cycle of damage. And so with our communities receiving, going through the numbers that the for the Hurricane Center presented, we hit above average on our storms last year. And so is that going to continue this year? I don't know, but being prepared to break that cycle and protect your residents and protect the structures is important. So once that structure is deemed substantial damage, then it comes into compliance with your ordinance, which is totally based to keep them safe, to keep their home safe. And so presenting it that way sometimes goes over well, sometimes doesn't. But knowing that the point of SD is breaking that cycle of damage, saving the money for the property owner. There's a slide I'll show you in just a moment where the owner was quite thankful because he knew not to put certain things in a certain level because it would be damaged by the floodwaters. And so saving them money so they're not having their entire first living space wiped out, that they were able to put that above and now it's not ruined. And then getting them back in their homes faster because they have access to funding. So having those residents that have a flood insurance policy can help get them that the funding to repair and not have that repetitive loss go in. And it also opens the door for the ICC, the increased cost of compliance. There's a $30,000 ICC funding that's available for those with flood insurance policies at the time of disasters. And that will allow them to get that extra assistance to raise their home to meet the FDPO or to outfit their home to meet the ordinances in their communities. And then it helps you as a community as far as keeping their home, keeping your damage minimal and helping your residents feel safe. And then the last one, as far as just keeping folks from just leaving a neighborhood because it always floods. So helping your overall community. So when we were going out and about, a lot of the pushback I get as a CFM reviewing the plans for development in the floodplain, a lot of pushback I get is regarding disconnect height, regarding HVAC height, regarding frustrations of limited use on that first floor, making sure it's unfinished or finished with flood damage resistant material used only for building access, storage, or parking. And so what was a neat learning experience and then allowed me to see it in action, that this house on the left he had water up to the base of his HVAC, according to him. I couldn't find a watermark, but and he was so thankful because it was just a cinder block area and he lost his tools. He had used it to store some tools. This house on the right, you can see the watermark. And because they had elevated their disconnect and their power, they were in much better shape than the neighbors on either side. And so elevating the structures in the M&E work, the water line is given of where that water had gotten. And for most of the structures we might see a disconnect box or the meter might have been put in too low. And so encouraging your residents to take that elevation for their M&E is valuable to them and helps your community stay safer. This was the one I mentioned earlier in the presentation, where if you look on the right, that's what the home looked like on August 22nd. And then the shot on the left is what the home looked like. I think it was the 8th or the 9th. But you can see that home had water up to above that first doorway. And when I spoke with the homeowner on our visit on the 22nd, he said, "I'm glad it's just cinder block." And he showed me, and it was a cinder block underneath, and they had just some like patio style furniture that you could have outside or inside. But he said, "Yeah, luckily our living space is above." And so we were talking, and but the water was so high, the boat passed by his boat. They had his boat, and it had passed by the home, and they popped the lattice out of the porch, and they got into the boat that way. And so this community was a fishing community, so they had gotten all their vehicles out. And then that they were very fortunate, and they had planned and evacuated. But just the magnitude of water that hit this area was amazing. This structure on the left was in one of the communities, and she did have a lot of loss and no flood insurance. But if you look on the photo on the right, you could see the dirt line on the front porch of how high the water had gotten. In the photo on the left, you see how it's receded by about a foot. When we went out to this site, it was around, I guess it was maybe the 22nd or maybe the 19th. There was still so much water on the side and the backyard. You had to hug up against the house to be able to walk around and check it out. But it was, again, for a newbie, it was pretty awe-inspiring to see the power and the depth that the water could reach. So when you think, or when I think of the 24 summary, we had 45 structures that had been originally recorded in that IADA list. So that was our, here you go, get out there for your CRS substantial damage. So we had the 2 field crews. Each field crew did 3 days of field work. And we were able to identify 79 structures that were impacted. And remember earlier, I had mentioned that some of the structures were initially labeled worse damage than they were for our CRS. And then some of them were not listed as damaged originally, but we added 2. Folks were very willing to come out and speak to us and tell us about damage, not just on their home or their neighboring home, but about others in the community. So they became a really good resource for areas where we could follow up and talk to the folks in the damaged homes if they were there. A lot of homes were still empty. Folks had not returned just yet. They still had no water on some of the communities. The community well had not been reactivated, and they had no power. So a lot of the structures were still empty because the homeowners hadn't returned yet. But with our substantial damage classifications, it did differ from the IADA. It was a more in-depth inspection, and then again with that community feedback we had, we could get a little bit more detailed snapshot of the impacts. One thing that was incredibly helpful, given the layout and the size of the unincorporated county's jurisdiction, having that IADA list that was established by the crews during that EOC operation time period was tremendous. It took away the guesswork. It allowed us to target those areas where damage had been impacted. We did get some calls in from other areas that had not received, or that we hadn't received structures in the IADA, and so we did field those calls as they came in. But the bulk of our impacts were exactly where our IADA had sent us, and so we could use that to identify the hotspots of impact, and it really helped given the area again that we had to cover for our community. So I'm one of my personal driving forces is how do I take what I just experienced and I make it better and I make it more efficient? How can we serve our residents better? What information did we need in the field that we didn't have in 24? What resources were they asking about that we didn't, have an answer to or have a contact for? So the kind of the driving mechanisms as I prepare my team. And so my team consists of John Locke is our GIS floodplain liaison. So he started working with us around Thanksgiving. So I've got a designated GIS floodplain person. He has his other roles as well in the GIS realm, but I know he's my floodplain CRS go-to. I have an inspector, John Glover. I have an assistant, Kate McCain, and then myself. So we're a small party of 4 to cover the area. But what's wonderful in the department, I have access to so many more folks. There's interns available. There's other engineers like Kevin Hayes, and then our admin, Jill Grow, they're CFMs, and I have access, and they're willing to help us out in these post-damage assessments. So not only increasing communication in your department on, hey, your CFM, I'm going to need you, or hey, your GIS experience, I'm going to need you, or hey, you got a 4x4 truck, I'm going to need you. So being able to identify who you need outside of your department or your current work family, into SEMA or other municipalities. There's a lot Tom McDonald helps us with the city of Savannah, and you can't do it on your own. There's a team across your municipalities and across your work environment. And so I encourage you to make those connections now, rekindle those connections from last year if you haven't, because the data sharing is so beneficial. As far as your post-disaster substantial damage plan, that's working on your, making sure your substantial damage determination letters are good to go. And again, like I said, on your resources, making sure that's meeting the need of your community. Checking your technology in the field. There are many times I was going to do my survey on my work phone and it wasn't uploading anything, but my inspector's sitting right next to me and he's able to upload it. So being able to have more technology than you might need was great. They're the same work phone types. They're on the same server or company, but yet his had a signal and mine didn't. And so checking and then some of our areas are quite remote. And so making sure that you've got a good signal, and then you don't know what your structure damage might be as far as signals being available or not. So checking your technology now for when you need to go in the field, not an if, but a when. Riverine flooding does not recede in 3 to 5 days. So be patient, work on the communities that you can, or work in the areas of the community that you can. And then at our last GAFL meeting, the Georgia Association of Floodplain Managers meeting in March, being able to say, Brian, I couldn't get out there in 3 to 5 days. I was twitching, So, and he's like, you shouldn't have been. You should have known it's going to take longer. But just using your community, Emily and Brian, using them as the resources are very valuable. But know that with riverine flooding, you might not be able to access, but just keep checking with your inspectors or your public works department, your parks and rec department, and finding out where can I get, what roads are open, when can I get out there, when you think it might be open. Strategizing on your CRS field teams. It was dumb luck, I'll be honest, but how important it was to have a tech savvy individual on both teams. So like I said, the intern who had developed our survey 123 was on our team. We stayed together that first day because of how much damage had been in one area. And so being able to have that immediate revision to our survey, I need to upload more than one picture in this field. Can you allow unlimited uploads? So her being able to log in and make those changes immediately. And then having that CFM on each team. And we had 2 CFMs on some teams, and that was huge as far as your citizens' assistance. That knowing FEMA regulations or funding opportunities, and then knowing building safety and permitting, having those resources was very valuable. So making sure your CRS team members are strategically placed and clumped so that you can meet the needs of the residents, especially if you have them going out independently. The other thing that I'm trying to keep in mind as we plan for the 25 was being prepared for anything. And so it was a little bit heartbreaking when the residents were coming to us asking us, can you turn my well back on? We haven't had water since August 6th. And I was like, oh, I don't have that capability. So who now, this coming year, I want to get the list. Who do I contact when these questions come up so that I can make those calls or reach out? And also there's trash piling up. These residents hadn't had power for a week or so, and their refrigerator's contents were all spoiled, and they wanted it out of their home. And so they're putting it out in the front, but obviously no trash pickup because the roads have been inaccessible. Compromised septic systems. When you have that much inundation, what are you walking through? So having your PPE in place, or Clorox wipes, or high enough boots. And then with being able to talk through folks about insurance, realizing that you might be talking to someone who just lost it all, their home and their car. And so being prepared for that mentally is important. And then being able to admit you don't have the answers right now and that you'll get back to them, but don't forget to get back to them. And so having a lot of your business cards or having special substantial damage or CRS business cards that you can pass out to folks would be something that was going to be added to our toolkits this year as we go forward. The other thing to keep in mind is your changing and development. So looking at the overall growth of Chatham County, we've had huge growth since 1990. It doesn't look like it's going to be slowing down anytime soon. And if you look, the population is set to what was 301,000 and a steady increase of 73,000 residents over the next 40 years. So the population is just going to keep going up. And it seems that as the population goes up, more homes, more development. So more stormwater flooding, more community flooding. But also when you think of our changes in tidal flooding trends, it's been observed that our trends, and you might have seen this map many times, but depending on which way you want to interpret it, you look at the darker blue is what's been observed, and you can see how it's trending up. Even if you just follow the putty colored section of the trend, even if you just follow that trend line, there's still an increase in our tidal flooding incidences. So Fort Pulaski's been keeping this data since 1935, and so it's local data, and then we can make some projections. So we don't want the extreme tidal flooding trend. That would just be catastrophic in many of our areas in unincorporated. But as we move forward, we want to shoot for that, and then that just means we have a safer community. The last thing on this, moving forward with as we plan for the 2025, when we look at the Helene impact, it impacted our non-SFHA parcels. So we did get an impact in Chatham County, and it's in the non-SFHA. In Chatham County, we don't regulate outside the SFHA. And so I can't require them to build higher at this point. I can't require certain things that I can require in our SFHA, but I can go out and I can educate when we do our community events. When we do outreach letters, we can add them. We can still reach out to these impacted individuals. So just keep that in mind. And then if we have that higher trend of tidal flooding, if we have a higher growth projection, if we can't reach all of those in our non-SFH area, it's a disaster waiting to happen for many of our residents, unless we educate. So you might have seen these, all the municipalities work together to get these newspapers into certain establishments throughout the community, into the newspaper. We're working to figure out what to do if our newspaper folks aren't, it's not as popular. So we're working on how to revamp this to reach our audiences, our 90% of the community. So we're going to work together with the municipalities and figure out what to do now, because we're not reaching 90% in this coming year because of how the subscriptions to the newspapers have fallen. The other thing, as far as elevate those structures, elevate that meter, elevate those HVACs, all that M&E, work to keep those elevated and enforce your ordinances. And then that's one great way to keep our residents safe. And on that, this is my contact information if you have any questions. And then I will go to the last slide about our next one, and I'll mute myself and turn it back to Emily.
Don't mute yourself just yet, Angela. We did have one comment, and I'm kind of curious how y'all saw these. Walter had mentioned that while evaluating flooded structures built on concrete blocks, to be aware that concrete can leach out of the concrete block after numerous flooding of those blocks. Those concrete blocks have no strength. My finger could easily be pushed through the block, making me condemn the use of that building to replace the concrete block. Um, did you have any experiences of where people were using concrete block to elevate their structures? That
The CMU blocks, yes. Is that what
yes.
he's mentioning? Yes, they were. There's many that have been elevated on that. Um, I was going to say I didn't notice any. Well, is it something? Educate me, Walter, on the CMUs. So, with when I actually went in that one, and then there were others that had no walls around it, but they're built up on the CMU blocks. But I didn't notice anything as far as structural integrity.
Okay. You also mentioned working with other communities. Walter mentioned that it did require numerous floods to get to that point where he was able
Okay.
to push his finger through.
Okay.
But working with other communities, do you have a regular agreement with the other communities to help them with administrating their flood ordinances?
No, we don't. We administer our unincorporated FDPO only. There's a lot. We have our CRS working group. I know Michael Blakely retired from Chatham County in January of 24, and I know we've talked with Tom McDonald about trying to get that back and active again. There's nothing, no MOU or MOA. There's no enforcement for what I can do in Savannah or Pooler or Tybee. So it's really, if it's a PIN number that's assigned to us, it's under our ordinances. Um, we get a lot of questions, and I'm sure they get a lot of questions about unincorporated parcels, but nothing as far as stepping over that jurisdictional line.
Okay. The reason why I asked was just out of curiosity of how much cooperation you had between the communities in order to go out and do assessments. Because I do know quite a few other communities were dependent upon each other to help out as well. Um,
Yeah, well, and it might, for the CRS substantial damage, there were no other communities that I did assessments for, but I wonder that IADA being under a SEMA umbrella, maybe there is something where, I mean, that I could see how that would be provided to every jurisdiction because they did a countywide.
okay. Very good, very good. Before we get started on wrapping this up, we do have a poll question that if Isabel, you think you can get that launched real quick?
Yes. So I'll go ahead and launch the poll. If you'd like to receive 1 hour of CFM continuing education credit, please answer the poll question. I will launch it now. You can answer using the buttons in the pop-up on the screen, and if the poll doesn't appear as a pop-up, then please check the chat. You may also type your answer in the chat if the poll doesn't appear there. We'll give a few moments for you to review and answer the poll question. Okay, it looks like the responses have slowed down. I'll give it another few seconds if anyone else wants to respond. Okay, so I'll close the poll now. It looks like 100% of people have said false. to the poll question.
Good. We're going to be a prepared group for sure this year.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Angela, for that very informative webinar. I hope everyone has enjoyed the presentation as much as I have.
Well,
We'll keep the chat open for a few more minutes so that if you've got a question, throw it in there along with your email so that we can respond to you and follow up. Mark July 9th from 12 to 1 on your calendars for our next Lunch and Learn webinar. And please make note of the registration link for the webinar and the survey link. Isabel, if you could put those in the chat as well so people can access that in case they don't have their QR readers out like me. Anyway, again, we greatly appreciate you completing the survey so that we may improve these webinars. We are offering 1 hour continuing education credit today for a session available to CFMs that completed the poll questions and provide their name and email in the address now. A copy of the presentation will be emailed to all attendees. If you're requesting continuing education credits, those certificates will be emailed separately. Once more, our next Lunch and Learn is scheduled for July 9th, so be on the lookout for that invitation. With that, thank you again, everyone, for attending today. And for those who don't have any other questions, this does end our Lunch and Learn webinar. Have a great day, everybody, and be sure to get your name and email address in the chat.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you.
And thank you, Walter, for that adding in those comments. That's helpful too. Brian, don't forget your email address. Thanks.
Emily, I got a question about substantial damage. Are you available? I can call you in a few minutes.
Sure.
Great.
Could it be a team call? I'm just kidding.
I mean, I can ask you the question now. You might know it, you might not. If I was supposed to, what happened is I had a house that was substantially damaged in 2022, and it was not completed. It was sold to another person, and now they're coming in to get the permit. So it was substantially damaged, but now I have a 2-foot freeboard versus a 1-foot freeboard. And with the new person coming in, do I enforce the 1-foot freeboard that was originally substantially damaged in 2022, or do I do it with the 2-foot freeboard that we have now?
Was it reassessed after was it reassessed in 2024 or did y'all say, no, we've already assessed this, we know they're working on it?
That's correct. And okay. It has been reassessed, but okay. I'm freezing it back from when it was originally done prior to the pre-construction.
Okay. Let me think about that one, get back to you on it.
Okay. That's why I was going, oh, what? How do you do that? do you enforce it? You know, because I mean, they had to elevate it, it's just 1 foot higher, but Still, the plans originally just showed 14, and now it has to go to 15 elevation. So it's
Well,
going
I
to
have
be
a
interesting.
question. I have a
Okay.
question similar to that, Tom. We have one that must have been damaged about the same time. No, a little before, because we're on this. It's been 7 years, and it's been sold, and they're wanting to raise it. It's a new owner, though. So I'm trying to delve into how that works.
It was 7 years ago.
Yeah. And I thought there was a statute of 6 years.
Actually, if they never got started with the double check your ordinances,
Okay.
but if they never got started, you issued a permit and they never started it, there's a
No,
limitation on how long the permit's good for.
they actually submitted to FEMA 7 years ago, or they submitted to FEMA after they bought the parcel, which I think was 3 years ago, and they're kind of still in the queue. So I didn't know if it can expire, I guess, if they're in the FEMA queue waiting for response, right?
Why would you have issued a permit if they're
There was
still in the
no
queue?
there we haven't issued a permit. I haven't gotten one.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But I just was worried about the time frame, but then with the fact that they've been in queue, that should hold their space, right? So to speak.
Well, since you haven't actually issued the permit, that's the bigger kicker for you. Um, because the permit, like I said, the permit, generally speaking, has a statute or some language in your ordinance that says you have X number of days to get started on construction, or this permit expires.
Right.
It does have that expiration date on it. So since you haven't issued a permit, because you're still trying to gather information, that's probably going to be the bigger factor for you.
Okay.
That rather than them being in, yes, we understand the evaluation of, because I'm assuming you're talking about being in the queue, that they are trying to get a letter of map amendment.
No, they're
No.
trying to get funding to raise it. I guess they're in a
Ah,
grant funding queue. Um,
okay.
that's where I was a little, I mean, we're
Uh,
helping them as much as we can, but
yeah,
and they started that process years ago. So,
yeah.
okay, different story then, never mind.
Different story.
Okay.
So,
Hmm.
all right. Well, thank everybody for coming. Tom and Angela, if y'all want to talk some more, give me about 30 minutes. And if we can have a little call, or we can talk later in the afternoon if that works better for you.